Hello, everybody. I want to talk to you today about my concept, my vision of future nature, gardens in the city. It's a new way of thinking about nature in cities, where the city becomes the garden, and the gardens are full of nature. I'm going to talk about some general principles about the idea, and then I want to share with you some examples and some case studies of my own work. Now, my name is Nigel Dunnett. I'm Professor of Planting Design, Urban Horticulture and Vegetation Technology in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Sheffield. And here are some of my social media and website contacts. I use social media a lot to post images of my projects and how they change over time. I guess half of my time is spent as a university professor teaching and researching into naturalistic planting design, sustainable planting design, new ways of planting design that can work under modern conditions of budgets and maintenance and people in the heart of the city, in the middle of the city. But then the other half of my time is spent as a designer and as a consultant, bringing all of those ideas and all that research to life. I'm a garden designer, a landscape designer, and as well as doing my own projects, I collaborate a lot with architects, other landscape architects and artists and engineers. Collaboration really is one of the most important things about getting these sorts of things done. My work is all about bringing colourful and beautiful nature into cities, and we've been talking about bringing nature into cities for a long, long time, greening cities, nature in cities. It still hasn't become the mainstream. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that when we talk about nature and ecologists talk about nature, it's very wild. And often it's very untidy, it's very messy, and it's not the sort of thing people want to see all around them. So we've taken a very different approach and thought about how do we make this beautiful and how do we make it colourful so that people like it. Not only like it, people love it and people want to have more of it. And this is really what I mean by future nature. It's not trying to copy what you find in real nature. It's a designed, amplified and enhanced form. Now, last year in 2019, I wrote this book, Naturalistic Planting Design, which has a lot of my ideas and a lot of my principles in it. And I'd just like to start off this talk by reading to you the first paragraph of the introduction to that book. I want to read to you the introductory paragraph to my book, Naturalistic Planting Design. This paragraph really sums up the whole book, and it sums up what I try and do with my work. And in many ways, these words are more important now than ever, certainly even more important than when I first wrote this book. We are bound to nature, tied tight. It's at our very core, in our blood, inescapable. It's integral to us. It's what makes us feel complete. We need it, but that's not surprising. Of course we do. We are part of it. The human desire to make gardens and to create green environments and even the bleakest of surroundings is a supreme example of that innate connection to the wild. To design with plants, to make our own expressions of the natural world, somehow brings us closer to that inbuilt yearning to be part of the bigger scheme of life. For me, this is why designing with plants is very important. Indeed, I could go further and say that it's essential to our very future. My aim is not just to create something functional or to fill a space or to copy nature. And it's even not just to make something beautiful. It's to create something that tugs deep inside us at an element that's fundamental. Above all, is to provoke emotions, hugely positive ones. And it's an amazing thing when a landscape, a garden, or a planting makes that happen. I think that's the incredible thing, really. We have the power with what we do to make people feel so happy, so joyful, to change people. And that's before we even start to think about all the environmental and other social benefits. So it's a hugely exciting thing that we can do. Now, I work with naturalistic planting design, ecological planting design that looks natural, but also has many of the processes of nature and plant communities in the wild. And why do I work that way? Well, of course, it is a much more sustainable way of working than more traditional approaches to using plants and green and landscapes. It's a more sustainable approach. I call it a low input but high impact approach to planting design. So we don't need so much water, we don't need so much energy, we don't need so much maintenance to achieve amazing effects. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you have this, these old adverts for Heineken beer. Heineken beer refreshes the parts that other beers cannot reach. Well, I think naturalistic planting design refreshes and reaches parts of us that other types of planting design just cannot reach. And I guess the bigger picture of what I do is trying to answer the question, or help answer the question, how do we change this, which is a kind of typical view of a high density modern city where there really isn't very much space for green, or certainly you can't see very much green there. How do we change that into something much more like this? This is a visual from a competition entry that I was part of this summer for a site in Milan. You might recognize the tall building in the back as being similar to the vertical forest, or the Bosco Verticali in Milan. Well, this was with the same architects. And in this entry, we have tried to cover every surface that we possibly could with green and with natural green. So it's really about how do we bring nature and people together in a way that's not just a nice thing to have, not just a good thing to have, it's something that is essential for our future. Now, this looks quite wild and a little bit untidy, like I said before. And so a lot of what I would try and do is to fill and cover every surface with beautiful and exciting and fantastic green and planting. And when we do that, we're not just doing it for people, of course, that we can bring wildlife and habitat into even the most difficult of places. A lot of my work is with roof gardens, podium landscapes, landscapes above structures in cities. And of course, we have to deal with places like this in very high density cities because there just is not the huge amounts of space on the ground to make big new gardens and big new parks. But when we work in an ecological and sustainable way, and when we put the focus on making beautiful landscapes and plantings that people want to see more of, and also when we make a focus on making beautiful landscape and plantings that is simple to maintain, that's not too complicated to maintain, then we can make beautiful places, but we can also do many things. We can use the green to help cool down overheated cities, or to dry out flooded cities, or to rehydrate dry cities, or to clean up polluted cities. It's an amazing thing that we can do with beautiful landscapes and vegetation. I'm going to talk about this project a little bit later on. This is part of the Grey to Green scheme, and it's not a wonderful garden in a great park or a very special place. This is on a street in the middle of the city of Sheffield, where I work. Now, I've said about creating beautiful plantings and beautiful landscapes which have a natural character. And we do have to do this. We have to amplify or increase the visual drama to really make it something that people are going to take notice of. So you could say what I do is enhancing nature, amplifying nature, increasing the visual drama. It's a little bit of a strange thing to say that you can enhance nature or you can make nature better. Many people would say you can never improve nature. That's a really bad thing to say. I take the opposite view. I think we can make nature better. We can improve nature when we want to bring it into the middle of our cities. We have to. And the power of designed nature, which is really what I do, as well as having all the environmental and biodiversity benefits, climate change adaptation and so on, is that we can unlock joy in people. We can release joy. We can reach deep inside people and liberate or free up maybe childlike emotions that are buried deep inside. What an amazing thing that we can even think about doing this. For me, it's about creating designed landscapes where you can feel surrounded by nature, immersed in nature. And it doesn't have to be colorful and bright. It can be very green, can be very calm, very relaxing. But it does mean that we have to think hard about how we design that, particularly for the planting. And although there are not many colors in this, it's all green. There's something here about the repetition of the same forms, the same shapes, the same plants over and over again to really build up that sense of drama. There's only 3 or 4 different plants here which are really flowering or looking really positive at the moment, but they're repeated and repeated and repeated, and that builds up a real sense of scale. Of course, it can be really colourful, but the same thing happens here. This is one of my gardens, Trentham Gardens, in the north of England, where we're using quite a simple range of plants, but repeating and repeating and repeating, so that again you get this very large, big sense of scale. So the benefits of nature-like landscapes and naturalistic planting in the middle of the city is that we can really reach people deep inside and have a very strong effect on health and well-being and just the way people feel when they're surrounded by this sense of designed nature. So really, my work is about infiltrating, pushing, making transformational nature everywhere. And we do have to think about transformational nature. We can't do this on just a small scale, a little green roof here, a small garden somewhere else, a rain garden somewhere else. The emergencies, the biodiversity emergency, the climate emergency that we are all living with, these are too big just for us to do small things. We have to do big things now, and we have to change the way places look. We have to change the way places are used. We have to change the way places are looked after by infiltrating and making transformational nature everywhere. This is next to one of London's main stations, St Pancras International Station in London. And this is a drainage swale, a bioswale, or rain garden, filled with one of my plant mixes. And there's a seating edge on the right, but then there's a road on the left, and storm water can flow off the road into this planting. But I think certainly a lot of ecological features like swales and water-sensitive design features can be very boring, very dull, very uninteresting. We can make them exciting, we can make them beautiful, but it's all about creating wonderful planting design within these engineered features. So where will the gardens of the future be? Well, they will be on the streets. The streets will become gardens, and the streets will be shaped by people and nature, not the car. This is one of the big battles we have. We have to change the way we think about our cities and give them back to people and to nature, and stop thinking that the car and the transport system is the main thing. We need to really completely transform our thinking. So it is about a future nature, a new nature. It's being artful with ecology and thinking about transformational greening. So we work with designed plant communities that are sustainable, that have the feeling of nature, but also work like nature. And here are some of the principles that really are beneath that. So they have to look good. That's number one. They have to work for people, high visual appeal. They have to be sustainable, so low inputs, like I've said, not so much water, not so much energy, removing chemicals, from the system. They do have to be easy and simple to maintain. To create large areas of this sort of planting, which is very complicated to maintain, means that it just will not survive into the future. It does have to have high ecological function. It has to work with stormwater management. It has to help with cooling cities. It has to be great for biodiversity. And it has to be adapted to the future climate. So we are future-proofing. We're thinking of the future when we design with planting. And for us in the UK, we're thinking about a dry future, much less rainfall than we have at the moment. Now, in the past, people working in this area of greening cities and bringing nature into cities would really put would turn this around. The ecological function would be the most important thing. The climate adaptation would be the most important thing. And how it looks, the visual appeal, would come at the bottom of the list. Many people have told me it doesn't really matter what it looks like. If it's working for ecology, then that's the main success. And that's why I think nature in cities and ecological landscape design still is not the mainstream. It's still not the default, because we have not thought about the visual, the aesthetics, and we have not put people first. So this is the way that I approach my work. And we know this sort of greening of cities is good for people. We know it's good for the environment, good for the planet, but it's also good for the economy. It makes economic sense. It's cheaper to maintain. It does not need so much money to look after compared to the same amount of hard surface. But cities and retail areas and places where businesses are that are rich in nature really do see the economic benefits. There's greater footfall, more people come, people stay there for longer, people spend more, and people travel further distances to be in environments which are rich in nature. So it makes a lot of economic sense to fill our cities with green. And we can be very, very natural with that. As soon as we start to be ecological and sustainable, it means it does start to look more natural. This is an example from this year, from 2020, in the city of Brighton, in the south of the UK. It's Valley Gardens, which is a 1.5 kilometers green corridor from the sea at the lower part of this image into the center of the city. And this was a big project. These parks, this green space was here before, but it was all lawn and the trees and the traffic, the cars going around the edge. There was a lot more road surface. At the moment, you can see 2 lanes, 2 directions. It was double this amount. So this scheme reduced the amount of cars, reduced the amount of road, and also converted a lot of the lawn green space into meadow-like plantings. And you can see along this edge here, this was lawn, and now it's meadow. And all of the brown sidewalk, that was the road. The road came all the way up to the edge. So we're giving a lot more space back to people. And here are some images, some photos from that site taken in the summer of 2020. Very natural, very meadow-like, but I wanted to really show these because of the urban setting, the cars, the buildings, the city. Working in a very natural way works really well in the middle of the city. In some ways, it works better because of the contrast with the buildings. It doesn't just have to be for places outside of the city or in the rural countryside. And of course, as soon as you start to do this, then people feel different and people use places differently compared, for example, to how this might have been just huge amounts of short grass and trees. In terms of changing the way places look and the way places are used and just being surprising, then this is an art project from this year. This is a living wall, but it's an art installation. I worked with an artist, Joe Peel, to incorporate naturalistic, meadow-like planting into this art installation. It's called Growing City, a public artwork produced by the artist Joe Peel and myself. The hand-painted mural or painting is 32 meters long, and celebrates the industry and the arts scene in the city of Sheffield. The mural, or the wall, features a living wall of plants showcasing naturally occurring urban plant species, promoting mental well-being and producing cleaner air. And that's really what it's all about when I mean infiltrating greening into every opportunity. It's quite wild. It's a little bit different to the sort of green walls that you normally see. I took these photographs 1 week ago in the first half of December 2020. And it's really important that it looks green and fresh right the way through the whole of the winter. We're using here a lot of plants which haven't really been used in green walls before. So this is a little bit of an experiment to see how we can make something that's really, really natural looking in the middle of the city. I want to finish off by looking at two big projects and see how they've really changed the places they are. The first is the grey to green scheme in the city of Sheffield in the north of England. Sheffield is about 200 miles, 250, 300 kilometres north of London. And this was a collaboration between myself, who worked on the planting design, and Zach Tudor, who is the landscape architect for Sheffield City Council. And it transformed this street into gardens. At the moment, you can see there are 4 lanes of traffic, 1, 2, 3, 4. The new scheme reduces that by half, so there are 2 lanes, and all of this space on the left has been converted into gardens. And this is a visual of that scheme. So this is really the same view. I worked with my students on this project at the beginning to help visualize and to help produce a concept. And this is one of the outputs of one of my students. And this is very, very close, very similar to the final scheme. But it's useful because it shows you that all of this greening is stormwater management. It takes the rainwater coming off the streets. A lot of tree planting for cooling. It's a green corridor, like stepping stones for insects and for birds. But it's also a beautiful place for people. So here's a visual done, I think, 6 years ago. And this is a photograph now with the same bus in it, showing how it is really like. This was all planted in 2016, this part of the scheme. So here's a plan. We don't really need to go into any detail. The white along here is the road, and then the green colours are the planted areas, and the blue-green, this area here, this is planted areas that will take runoff, water runoff from the pavements and the street, and the lighter green colour are planted areas where the water doesn't go. So these stay dry all the time. There's no added water, no additional irrigation is given to these plantings. So this is in the middle of the city of Sheffield, and the quality and the diversity of planting here is quite amazing on the street. Here it is full of people and vehicles. And what's interesting to me is how natural people feel just going up and down this street. To me, it's quite amazing to have this on the street and for people to be surrounded by it on both sides. I took these photos in February 2020, so in the winter of this year, just to show what it looks like in the winter. People often ask me, how do these plantings look in the winter? You always show lovely pictures in the summer. Well, here are some images in the winter. We leave all the seed heads, all the stems standing over the winter, and we choose the plants so they look good in the winter as well as in the summer. For maintenance, we cut back all the grasses and perennials twice. In November, December, we cut back any plants which are looking really untidy, have fallen over, really scruffy, but we leave really everything else standing until the end of February, the end of the winter, when everything gets cut back and all those cuttings are taken away. And then we start again, everything grows up. There are a lot of spring flowering bulbs and plants in here. And very quickly it becomes green again. I took these photographs last week, 1 week ago, to show how this looks in December. These are COVID streets, of course, with the pandemic, and so there are very few people using the streets now. But again, early winter for us, and the seed heads and the ripened colour really starting to show. Here's some images of it being constructed. This was all the road before, and then just this part of the road remains. These are basins, these are depressions, so the water can go into them. So these are excavated out to create these shapes for planting, and then backfilled with an engineered soil, and then a surface layer of stones put on top of that. The soil substrate formulation is 70% crushed stone, local stone, gravel or aggregate, so it's very mineral. 20% composted green waste, organic material, and then 10% of soil, sandy silt loam, and then 100 millimeters of this surface mulch or surface layer of aggregate, gravel, or stone. And we plant into that stone layer. It's very free draining, very low nutrients, so the plants stay small, but it's a really important weed control part of the system. So there it is, ready for planting. And here it is in the first few months after planting. This is spring of 2016. So it looks very bare, very open, but that stone layer is really important to help with the maintenance. I use a lot of very quick flowering plants so that the visual impact is immediate, is very short, or very soon after planting. And then, of course, some of these are quite short-lived, but the longer term, the bigger plants grow up and take over the display in the later years. But this is 3 months after planting. The fence line going through is just to stop animals and children running through onto the road. So this is year one. This is on a slope, and these lines across are just to slow the stormwater down as it comes down the slope or comes down the hill, to stop it turning into a river or a stream. So these dams, these stop the water from flowing fast. They fill up behind and then overflow over the top of each of these dams. So this is in 2016, just after planting. This is the same view in the spring of 2019. So you really can't see those concrete strips anymore. And this, I think the next slide is the same view in the late summer, the fall of 2019. So we aim to have a really long season of flowering and visual interest. So this is phase one, the first phase of the Greater Green. And as you can see here, we use the same mix of plants throughout the whole of this area, with some additional structure with the use of these upright grasses, Calamagrostis, Carl Forster. Now, there's been a second phase planted and created this year, 2020. We changed it a little bit. Instead of using just one mix of plants all the way through, we've used 4 different plant mixtures in long strips or stripes or drifts. It's a really important principle that I work with. So in this phase one, there's just one plant mix goes all the way through that blue-green color, and just one plant mix goes all the way through that light green color. But as I explain a lot in this book, working with combinations of different mixtures gives you a really beautiful visual effect. So this is the plan for phase 2, and these different colored areas, there's a blue one going through the middle, a pink one, and an orange one. These are different mixtures, so there's much more of a detailed design. Looking a little bit closer, for example, the blue strip going through the middle is taller, more structural grasses and perennials, and then on each side there are shorter, more mixed, more flowering mixtures of perennials. So this is a little bit more complicated, a little bit more sophisticated. It's a development of the ideas that have gone into the second phase of the planting. So these are all photographs from this year. This is from the summer of this year. This is one mix on the right, a different mix on the left. It's amazing again. This is in the middle of the city alongside traffic and roads and people. Next to one of our big intersections or roundabouts. The diversity and the detail of this planting. And of course, this is going to be really wonderful for biodiversity. So this is the same area. This is photos taken in September. And these photos are taken 1 week ago in the middle of December. So we aim to really continue that flowering and visual interest into the winter. And then, of course, the seed heads and the winter structures take over. This is a photo from last week, middle of December, with a lot of visual interest still. And we're still planting. So this was, again, is last week in the middle of December. And this is just showing one of these areas here. So the photos I'm going to show this blue strip being planted. So on the left is the blue strip, and here is the blue strip going through the middle of this planting bed. The other mixes haven't gone in yet. They're happening now. So this is that central strip coming down through the middle of this planting area. And again, you can see the white line showing where the different strips will be. You can see the landform, the topography is all about collecting water. So this can fill up with water after really strong storms. But of course, a lot of the time it is dry. And then in the middle of it this is very biodiverse friendly planting, very wildlife friendly planting. And there are also insect hotels and bug hotels put in the middle of this as well. The planting hasn't gone in yet, but the structures are there in advance. A lot of seating so that people can really come very close to these planted areas. Okay, my last example is in London, and it's the Barbican, and this is now 5 years old. I think I would just summarize it by saying this is such a good example of transformational green. And when we transform landscapes in a sustainable way, that changes how they look, it changes how they're used, it changes how they're experienced, it changes who they're for, and it changes how they are maintained, how they are looked after. The Barbican in London is a development from the 1970s and 1980s. It's a world famous example of brutalist, modernist architecture, and it's very, very urban and very, very grey. Incredible development in the middle of London. When it was created, it was like conceived as the perfect place to be with shops and residential areas, theatres, libraries, and also public transport connection into London. But I guess interestingly, all the gardens and all the spaces you'll see that I show you are roof gardens or podium landscapes. There's always something underneath them. So for example, here underneath this courtyard, there's the theatre and all the seating for the theatre, and parking lots and car parks and roads all go underneath. So there are no cars, there are no vehicles within this landscape. And previously, this was a very traditional landscaped area with short grass, lots of big trees and shrubs, evergreens, highly intensive, and a lot of seasonal summer colour and spring colour. So here are some images of how it looked before. Quite nice. But to keep it all green needed a lot of irrigation. This is all roof garden. So 7 years ago, there was a leak discovered in the waterproofing beneath all of this, and water was getting into the buildings and the rooms below. And the only way they could find the leak and repair it was to take all of the landscape away, put a new waterproof layer in, and then build up a new landscape. And this is really how I got involved. I was asked to come in and design the new landscape. Now, previously, it's highly intensive, but also very simple. So monoculture, low diversity of standard landscape shrubs and trees and perennials. And the maintenance was often about keeping the surface beneath all of the plants completely free of weeds. So you'd have a lot of bare soil or mulch soil. So it was really very little value for biodiversity and wildlife, but a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of chemicals used to maintain it, as well as a lot of water used to allow these plants to grow on this rooftop surface. So it was all taken away, it was all cleared back to the concrete deck, and then that gave the opportunity to start again with a new landscape and to bring in new engineered substrate, very like I just talked about with the greater green, very free draining, low nutrient, so we can create diverse plantings if we have low nutrient substrates. These squares in the middle of where this substrate, this soil is going, there's a road underneath here, and these are air vents or ventilation for the road beneath. Here are some visuals that we produced to give an indication, a sense of what the new landscape might look like, very different from that previous landscape of maybe just one or two different types of landscape shrubs, lawns, and then clean soil beneath. We look to have maybe 60 or 70 different types of plants and no visible soil beneath. And here it is. So this is the new landscape taken in the spring. These are those ventilation areas that you saw before. The intention here was to create a dry meadow, a drought-tolerant meadow, a meadow that doesn't need a lot of extra water, but which has flowering interest from the spring right the way through into the summer. But the crucial thing here is that it's a very diverse planting, but quite simple. So at any one time, there's only a few different plant species make the main visual impact all the way across. This is a little bit later in the year. A whole new layer of plants have come up through. There are those ventilation areas again. So this is really the UK's largest inner city climate change adaptation project. It's designed to be a low water use urban landscape. I have not been able to get there this year. These are photos from 2019, but I was sent this photo from 2020. So this is how it looked this year. Then everything, as the summer goes on, it becomes drier. It's more about seed heads, different textures, beautiful, but it's different. This is very different to our standard way that landscapes look in the UK. Towards the end of the summer, a lot more ripening off of the grasses with late flowers, really quite blue and quite purple with some yellow. I took this photograph in September this year, September 2020, when things are really becoming very dry and going from green to brown with the seasonal change. Again, September 2020. And then November, this is November 2018 and November 2019. So the aim for me is to have a lot of winter interest as well. So I use a lot of evergreen or wintergreen plants, as well as summer flowering and plants with great seed heads and great winter structure. So this is December 2019 with textures and different browns and seed heads, as well as all the evergreen plants. And really, it looks as fresh and as vibrant in December and January in our winter as it does in June, July, and August, our summer. So this new landscape has resulted in a 70% reduction in water use, a 40% reduction in maintenance time. There's one gardener for this area who works 20 hours a week. But also, because it's been so interesting, there's now a gardening group of residents. I forgot to mention that the Barbican is Europe's largest arts and cultural complex with cinemas and theatres and so on. But it's also a residential area with 4,000 people living there. And there's a new gardening group of residents who come and help add to the maintenance that the gardener does. So just to summarize, I've looked at my concept of future nature, the idea of a new vision of gardens in the city, where the city becomes the garden and the streets become the gardens, and the gardens and the streets and the city is for people again. And it's sustainable. It's a low input but high impact way of thinking, but it's transformational, and we need to do it on a transformational scale. But when we do that, things look different, things are used differently, and places have to be maintained differently.